We're going to get started with our next keynote address by Joanna Bryson. And then, as I said, we will move from there directly into another set of lightning talks that will be focused more on applications of AI in cultural heritage. So Joanna is, at least until February, a professor in Department of Computer Science at the University of Bath. There she founded the Intelligent Systems Research Group. She takes what I would consider a very human-oriented approach to AI, which might have something to do with her background in behavioral sciences from University of Chicago. She also studied AI at University of Edinburgh, where their AI, as opposed to in this country, AI there is much more oriented to issues of psychology rather than machinery. In February, as I said, Joanna is going to be taking up a new position as full professor of ethics and technology at the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin, where she'll have an opportunity to more fully, I suppose, indulge her interest in the implications of AI and public policy. So welcome, Joanna.
All right, I'm going to demonstrate that I've had too much time on airplanes lately. All right, thank you. All right, this is really funny. I should act like I was really very knowledgeable, but I have a little bit of free time because the morning was so wonderful. I hope you guys all saw the morning, that a lot of what I wanted to say has already been said. But also, some of what I wanted to say, I said previously at a Norwegian radiologist meeting. So this is going to look like really prescient that I knew there was loads of Norwegians here, but actually it just happens. Everything works. What can you say? There is something else I should tell you, which is that I don't know if you noticed it, but my talk title and my abstract had nothing to do with each other. So if you want to see the talk with the abstract, look at Joanna Bryson Keel. That version of the talk is on the internet. Let's do this version instead. Okay, so this is not. I don't think this is on the internet. Okay, so I know why I was there in Oslo talking to the Norwegian radiologists, all right? And here's why. Oh, yeah, elephant in the room.
So, Jeff, perhaps a similar question, if you may. What do you think is some of the most exciting work to come?
Okay, so, sorry. Let me start by just saying a few things that seem obvious. I think if you work as a radiologist, you're like the coyote that's already over the edge of the cliff, but hasn't yet looked down, so doesn't realize there's no ground underneath him. People should stop training radiologists now. It's just completely obvious that within 5 years, deep learning is going to do better than radiologists, because it's going to be able to get a lot more experience. It might be 10 years, but we've got plenty of radiologists already.
So he's going to go on. That's worthwhile looking up. I just want to say that I can tell you there's actually more radiologists now. There has not been this sudden catastrophic decline in radiologists. And the interesting thing is that they actually produce more value. So it is also partly because people are getting older and people are trying to evade death, as you might have heard if you live in the Silicon Valley. So anyway, there is, but also that they're getting a bigger payoff per radiologist because of all these tools. And they were really into AI, and they hadn't thought about the big picture. And so I'm going to talk a bit about this. I don't know if you noticed, not only am I only talking about my title, but I changed the title. It's Can We Save the Librarians Now, not just is there a use for them or something. But anyway, so this is the outline of my talk. I'm the first talk after lunch, but nobody really has talked about what AI is, so I will actually do a quick whirlwind on that, but I'm mostly going to focus on employment, and then I'll talk a little bit about policy. All right, so what is intelligence? I have heard full professors of AI get up on stage and say, we can never build AI because we don't know what intelligence even is. All right, this is like not understanding how words work. Okay, there's lots of definitions of intelligence, and here's my favorite one. It's over a century old, and about a century after it got written, I got taught it at University of Chicago. The basic idea, because I think the reason I like it is it doesn't require you to be human, because it was written in a book about comparing different animals, how intelligent they are. So it's also the one I was taught, again, when I went to do my master's degree in Edinburgh in 1993. All right, so this is a very well established. So which definition we choose to talk about is a matter of policy. It's not a matter of fact. And I think this is one of the confusions people have also about artificial intelligence, as people have been talking. It's something we build. It's not something scientists have dug up that was already out there. It's a policy, what we choose to build. All right. So one way to rephrase that definition is that intelligence is a capacity to do the right thing at the right time. All right? You can also think of that as a form of computation. In fact, I'm going to say it in the next slide, so I'll skip that right now. But it's computation because it's transforming the information which you're perceiving right now about what's going on into a choice of action. For most of you, hopefully just listening right now. Right? But for me, I have to think of what to say next. So if you accept that definition, then AI gets super easy to define. It's the subset of all the computation that is intelligence, the subset of all that somebody built. Okay, that's what artifact means, not a big magic thing, okay? And this is a really great definition. Again, why do I choose this one? I have other definitions of AI. One of my favorite definitions is it's the part of the information communication technology we over-identify with, right? But this one is great because it makes it clear who's responsible, all right? The A is for artifact. Artifact means someone built it. When they built it, they committed an action for which humans normally hold other humans to be responsible, all right? So a little bit more detail about this. As I mentioned, computation is a transformation of information. Apologies to mathematicians, but that's not math. Okay, I know math likes to grab AI as its own, but computation is a physical process. And physical processes take time, space, and energy, right? That's why you have to upgrade your computer and stick more RAM in it, because it takes space, right? Physical space to think, all right? So finding the right thing to do at the right time is often cast as search in AI. Now you're going to think, oh, this is like retro AI because nowadays we learn. Learning is a kind of search. You're looking for the right parameters to put in your model, okay? So bear with me. This is just going to be a quick illustration, again, so you get the idea of what the problems are of intelligence, right? And sorry, it's like the one equation. No, there's one other, two. You can look for the next one. And the number of options raised to the number of possible acts for a serial computer. Okay, so an example here is if you had a robot that could do 100 different things, and then you gave it a thing it had to do, and it didn't understand what the consequences of its actions were, so it had to try them all. Okay, in the worst case, if you said, go to Iceland, Norway, Oslo, go to Oslo to the robot, and if it happened that one of the 100 things that it came programmed with was go to Oslo, then in the worst case, it would have to try 100 things. But what if it has to do 2 things, like turn left, then go to Oslo, okay? Then there's already 10,000 possible plans, right? 100 things that you have to try, followed by 100 other things that you have to try. So this is combinatorial explosion, and it's unbelievably vast. So even chess, which we've all learned is nothing compared to Go, and let me tell you, Go is nothing compared to life, all right? Even just mere chess for 35 move games, not infinitely moving the rook back and forth, is already greater than the number of atoms in the universe. And the first person who sat down and did the math for that is, in fact, Claude Shannon, the guy who invented information theory 2. Again, go Google it. I only have 30 minutes here. I'm not going to go through that. Now, what can we do? How can we possibly be smart then if thinking is that hard? Well, one thing you can do is you can split the problem in half and put it on 2 computers. And that's only going to cost a little bit more than having then double, right? So you're almost going to have it. So you now have 2 computers, so twice the space, and twice the amount of energy at the same time, right? If you think about it, it's about the same amount of energy as you would have done if you'd waited that extra time, right? But you save half the time, okay? So that's called concurrency. Quantum computing, which we've heard a lot about lately, is sort of similar. For a subset of possible problems, you not only save time, but you also save space. However, the people who have been working on this have not been thinking very hard about energy. And I think we've started to hear recently about the energy costs of some of the actual big data over computing. I loved Rachel talking about the fact that there's this complete myth that you need all this stuff now to do anything. But again, it's almost like bullying people out of the discipline. But anyway, energy does matter, and quantum apparently takes a lot more than people would even anticipate by this kind of math I just did for you. So the more little bits you have, the harder it is to get them to focus where they're supposed to be, apparently. I'm not an expert in this stuff. This is my local expert, local to the UK. All right, so things people have worried about, like that we would find one magic algorithm that's even better than deep learning, and then whatever country found that algorithm first was going to have like omniscience or dominance or irrevocable dominance. That's just false. Okay, that's not how the universe works. We will never know all the things. It's impossible to have every possible thought. All right. So why are we doing so much better than other species in some senses if you don't worry about climate change? It's because we are really good for animals at concurrency. We have this language stuff. We exchange huge amounts of information, and so we can coordinate much better than most other species. Okay, and this is that wonderful intro that you did this morning about what do librarians have? Well, what do we as a species have because we've sort of invented librarians? Is this access to all this information. And now, indeed, as we've been hearing, we do upload this with machine learning. And I'm just going to skip over this. Everybody was talking about this morning, but a lot of what we saw recently, the stuff that gives us very human-like intelligence, is showing that we're uploading not only stuff that we have figured out, like Wikipedia, but also why does Boston Dynamics look so much like two guys that have had their bodies cut off somehow in a costume? It's because they also did motion capture. So we're mining biology as well as cultural evolution. All right, so I just said that. This is a paper I'm not going to talk about. People love talking about bias. Again, beautifully covered this morning. But yes, you do get the same bias if you have upload data about the human lived experience. You wind up with human-like biases, which is actually super interesting. This paper didn't just show that oh my, AI is sexist and racist, but it also showed that human implicit biases, I mean, this was a big deal when the psychologists discovered it in the 90s. And people are actually anti-realist about this. It's like a huge result. But until our paper came out, they were starting to undermine it, going, we don't want this to be true. We don't trust psychologists. But totally different way we validated that result. But anyway, here are the evil sexist word embeddings that think that women's names are more closely associated with family stuff than with career stuff, and vice versa. So these are these evil sexist things. And then this is the actual proportion of women who work in various jobs, and each dot is a job. And everybody's like, oh, well, what's that job, or what's that job? The names and the labor stuff are more than one word, and this only works for a single word, so the noise is coming in from that, from just dropping adjectives. So incredibly high correlation between our implicit biases, our evil, sexist, racist expectations, and our lived experience. So what this tells us is that some of these biases that we find that we're so upset about are about our real world, right? And so our implicit behavior is not the ideal. This doesn't mean that that's okay. It means that the ideals that we have, our explicit plans, are things that we've constructed, that we're trying to pick new targets. And this is one of the great things about AI that you have to worry about, is if you train all the AI on our imperfect past, you might propagate our imperfect past too much into the future. On the other hand, this is allowing us to know something. With this stuff, we couldn't really know what was going on. In fact, some of the people that made it hard to do this kind of work were saying, no, you don't understand. This shows that people are really evil. It wasn't until we got it into the AI that we were able to show, like, no, that stuff you're calling evil is actually lived human experience that we need to deal with. Okay? So AI can actually help us with our own biases. All right, so that was what is AI, and I'm actually running out of time. Oh well. So let's talk about employment. So if I went away and wrote a program that doubled the efficacy of teachers, not quite librarians, but let's focus on something people are even more wrapped up in. All right, then two things could be true. We could have twice as good of schools, or we could have half as many teachers. All right, there's nothing about AI that says which of those comes. And that's why this panel this morning was so important when they started talking about policy and regulation. Again, this is not a fact of nature. This is a decision taken by people through their governments, right? So we have to come up with these kinds of solutions. So it's a normative policy decision. But there are some consequences, right? If in the case where we have half as many teachers, okay, fewer people have jobs, maybe the higher average quality teachers. That's what happened when we got PCs. Everybody laid off like 2/3 of their secretaries, the worst 2/3, and the best secretaries were kept around to do the extra work with these nice new computer things, right? So maybe that's true, but we also have these other sides. For example, fewer whistleblowers, fewer probabilities of somebody letting us know. But again, some companies don't like whistleblowers. So they think, well, that's too much trouble, right? And I have heard, and I've been frightened, American generals saying, we can't trust people, we want to replace all the people with like a single algorithm. And it's not, yeah, anyway. So if you have less diversity, I think you have more fragility. But maybe we can avoid that, I don't know. These are all kinds of consequences of reducing the number of people per employment. But that still doesn't tell us the number. It's not that there's fewer secretaries now than there were before we had PCs. There's fewer secretary per little company, which may mean that we have even more little companies, right? I know that California, one of the reasons it's a great place for startups is that it's easier to share administrative support between companies here for some kind of legal reason. And what I do know more about is this, that as David Otter helped document in this absolutely amazing paper, Why Are There Still So Many Jobs? I'll skip this actually. I'm sorry, it does matter when we talk about unions, but I'm going to skip unions because I'm running out of time, and I much more want to talk about this, the real issue. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm rattling because I'm thinking about the time. Well, okay, I said what I said. Unions matter, and I will eventually get to the point I was trying to make. No, I'll just tell you. The point I was trying to make is this very famous example, which will come up soon, I'm sure, which is that there's actually more bank tellers now than there were before we had automated teller machines. But there's fewer bank tellers per branch, but there's more branches, right? So things are complicated. On the other hand, there's a lot fewer journalists now, not because we've built AI journalists, but because we got rid of all the advertising money, right? So it's complicated. Anyway, one thing I really worry about is that AI may be increasing inequality by making it easier to get a job. And this comes back into professional jobs like being a librarian, okay? So it may be easier to become who you are, and so I'll give these examples. There's the ATM example, I just told you that one. It's interesting because part of why the branches are so much cheaper is not just that you need fewer tellers, they were actually relatively inexpensive. It turns out that with fewer tellers, you needed fewer branch managers. And so you no longer have those people that you were kind of dropping into every sort of little neighborhood that had a lot more money that could provide, benefits of other kinds into the community, like, pay for the basketball court or something. There's also a second example like that with accountants, but I want to go to this third one. For truck drivers, a lot of people are saying, what's going to happen with driverless? All these people, 2 million people are going to lose their jobs. And then you have Uber and Luciano Flirty, a few people like that going, oh, but there aren't enough truck drivers now, right? Well, why are there not enough? It's because it's making 50% less than it did when you were truck drivers in the 1970s. So the only truck drivers left tend to be sort of older men who still are willing to do this kind of miserable job for not that much money, all right? And what changed is that in the 50s and 60s, there didn't used to be this thing called power steering. And if you remember that definition I gave you of way back about AI transforming like a little bit of motion into greater power, it used to be that you had to be a very powerful individual, very strong individual, and good with maps, right? And good with bookkeeping. Now you just have to be, able to drive a car and able to use GPS. It's not everyone, but it's a lot more people, so the wages go down. Okay. So I mentioned this already. This thing about, I want to come back to this. This is the other equation. I'm sorry, I was going to say spot it. It's Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection. Now, I can't believe I have to say this. You're librarians. I probably don't have to say it to you. But in this region, there are people who think that we don't need that many people, and everybody's going to wipe each other out anyway. And they're saying they're arming themselves up with private militaries. It's nuts, right? So when you're trying to argue functionally, not just out of your heart, about why do you need more people, one reason is that the rate of evolution is proportional to the amount of variation in a population. You need diversity. You need diversity to be able to adjust, to innovate, to come up with change, right? So I think it is really important that we talk about that what is at stake when people think you can replace, a large number of people with a small number of algorithms. All right. So, okay. AI and redistribution. So we are actually richer than we've ever been. And there's this thing about, like, was it Keynes? Somebody said, in 100 years, we're not going to need to work more than 20 weeks a year or something. And everybody's like, but we're working all the time. Well, if you did want to be as well off as somebody, an average household or whatever from a century ago, you would only need to work 20 weeks a year. But we all want more. There's more out there. We want more, right? So, one of the things people are saying is, given there's all this money out there, why don't we just give it away, right? I'm personally a little skeptical about this because I've seen too many people in both of my countries, both America and Britain, saying the government has done nothing for them while they're standing in the middle of a road. There is a road, nobody's robbing them. There's so many public goods that have been provided that become invisible, and I think basic income would become one of them. But I'm also worried that it would fragment society, that we like having the relationships between people. We like finding people who value our skills, and we like having people who depend on us if we were able to raise some money. So we love that connections, and I'm worried that the push towards basic income would create fragmentation. Now, I've had this argument with a guy who I otherwise really respect, a guy standing for a while, and he's gone out and done experiments in little communities, and they've shown that actually there's been this incredible amount of community investment, and it looks like it does contribute. However, if you're only doing basic income in little tiny study areas, then of course they suddenly feel this incredible in-group identity because they've got this really good little in-group asset. So I'm still not sure if this would persist over decades and generations. Look at the experiments we did with socialism in the 20th century, which were phenomenally fantastic for like 30 years even. But after about 70 years, you found people slacking off in the third generation. So I just said that. All right, so what should we do? Okay. This is part of my normal talk, and I'm skipping through it really quickly because I'm running out of time. But a lot of people are worried about AI itself, and I'm not going to talk about that here. But they think it's because something is intelligent, they already owe it a moral obligation. And so I did some research, and I found out that name for stuff you owe moral obligations is a moral patient, right? And that the things that are responsible for their own actions are moral agents. And these are determined by a society. Like, we can't even agree between American states how old you have to be to consent to have sex, right? Or how old you have to be married. Between countries, we can't agree how old you have to be before you're allowed to be in the military, right? So some very, very basic ethical decisions about what it is to be an adult are very, very much by society. And so from that, so most people, that's just fact. And definitions. This is something people hate that I say. I think the consequences of that is that when we're trying to understand ethics, we need to realize that ethics is the means by which we hold our society together. And the reason people hate that is because they want to say, but we're more ethical than the Nazis, or whatever, right? They're going to pick someone, we're more ethical than we were 10 years ago when there was a different party in power, right? I'm not taking away your capacity to say that. I'm just saying you have to say in terms of what. Okay, the Nazis were really sure they were super ethical, right? So you have to say we're more ethical because we provide more equality of opportunity, or we're more ethical because more infants live to adulthood, or something like that. You just have to be a little more clear. So, so this kind of explains why there are those variations, because what it takes to sustain a society depends partly on the context of that society, who its neighbors are, whether it's an island. There's all kinds of things that affect what your risk trade-off. All right, yeah, talking about responsibility. I already mentioned this before. Since we're responsible for things, right? The whole idea of responsibility and intention, that is part of our ethical system. We invented those ideas. And one of the things I work very hard on is saying, don't let the invention of the idea of AI break our accountability to each other. What we care about is the actions of other humans, and in fact, that's the only thing we can hope to control, right? And so we need to make sure that we maintain these things. So government and enforcement are public goods, right? It's a means of maintaining the other public goods. And the idea is that I hope we can all be committed to maintaining those particular public goods. All right. So what even is government? Landau actually is one of the, when the European Union was 7 guys in a room, he was the French one. Okay? And what he says is, like, what you do when you govern is you pick a problem to solve, you allocate resources, you perform redistribution, and then you try to stabilize that solution by distracting people, which is, I think, getting harder. I think that's why governance is getting harder, because there's so many people connected to Twitter and they notice. Right? But anyway, so corporations and countries both have governments. So when I talk about governing AI, I am not saying, like, oh, let's pass all the buck over the wall to Washington, D.C. I am talking about both sets of problems. We need to police the corruption in each other. We can use the companies to help us police our government, as well as using the government to help us police our companies. And if we are companies, we can also use the government to help us police our competitors and keep us all from racing to the bottom, right? So government is a tool, right? So good government by each makes these interactions easier. Think about it like it's an API, right? So talking about allocating resources and redistribution, one of the things people are very worried about right now is political polarization. And it turns out political polarization is correlated to inequality. So if you're in a wonderful place like this, you think, well, is it so bad to have inequality? Because, one donor might have given us the whole room, I don't know, all right? But actually, in periods with very high inequality, we tend to get total mayhem, right? This is like World War I here, all right? So the darker one is the percent of income over here that the top 1% of earners get. And then this lighter gray is the polarization index, which is measured by how much Republicans and Democrats cooperate in Congress. This also works to the state level, incidentally. But anyway, what happened was that after one world war and one financial crash in the United States, there was basically an allegiance done between enough of the elite plus the proletariat that you had FDR, you had the New Deal. And then we were able to bring down the level of wealth inequality. First, the polarization, at least the polarization so we could agree to things. We brought down the inequality, and we had a long, stable period. A lot of people right now are talking about this great decoupling in 1978. What went wrong? Why is productivity no longer determining wages? I think it's the wrong way to think about it. I think we should say, what went right when we got on top of this problem the 30 years previous to that? That was something where we had the kind of courage to work together that we see now. Okay, I am totally out of my time, so I won't really do this build. But this is not to say that everybody should have exactly the same. Incidentally, empirically, a 0.27 Gini coefficient out of 0 to 1. So like some amount of advantage for what you do does seem to help. But too much inequality and you just get mayhem. That's the bottom line. Okay, so what I told the Norwegian radiologists was, well, don't worry too much. Because it's actually Norway has previously been the go-to example of how not to experience a resource curse, right? Like Saudi Arabia has, right? Wealth is distributed, it's not just captured by the elite. Or at least it has been historically. Actually, if you look at the last few years, it's a little worrying. When people are doing really well, they get attacked right now. But anyway, as of 2011, actually I've got, here's Norway. Notice what this is. This is the income inequality, and this is health outcomes, okay? So the lower your inequality, the better you are, and that's bad health outcomes, okay? So that you're better, you're healthier if you have lower inequality, right? And look at America, we're so bad at this. All right. And this is where this is 2011, as I mentioned, and this is where I'm moving. Okay, anyway. Apparently what this says, there's enough Norwegians they can correct me, is that the Norwegians are like, paying taxes isn't that bad. All right? These are the blue line is the Norwegians that want to pay less tax. Okay? Meanwhile, in my other country, we are having unbelievable poverty. And the UN had to come in and document this. This is an Anglosphere country that's been absolutely destroyed. When you go to Norway and you mention Brexit, most countries are angry or they laugh at you. In Norway, people just start crying. It's really weird. And it's because they've experienced being outside of the EU for the last 30 years because of a referendum. And so they know that they can't believe that Britain is walking into this, right? But regulatory capture in the UK apparently happened because of the financial sector. In America, who's capturing it? Again, I'm sorry, I have too many slides. But one of the definitions of war is dismantling your enemy's infrastructure such that they lose autonomy with respect to you. And this is just a little map by coincidence of the colors are indicating who benefits and who loses by global warming. All right. So arguably we're at war. I wouldn't be surprised if 200 years from now we'll say we're at war, but there's no missiles flying. It's happening in the digital sphere. All right. So what about actual libraries? Right? Well, change is definitely coming. AI may well make you better at doing your jobs, okay? Therefore, it may lower the entry barriers and salaries, right? And that might be good for something like, well, I'm sorry, this is radiologist. I shouldn't have left that in. Sorry. Instead of health, let's say knowledge, okay? Sorry about that. I was editing pretty well. Sorry I missed that one. But do remember that if we do the right things, we will be under attack, right? And so it is hard right now, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. What I tell policymakers is that if we legislate and adjudicate for accountability, transparency will follow, and we do have responsibility definitionally. And this was, again, brilliantly, a point I already made earlier today about that how are we going to maintain accountability for companies that are making money off of digital stuff? That's not the only problem. There's a lot of other companies that are transnational and not having adequate redistribution. But one way is just to keep records of whether they were doing the right thing, whether they were, this thing about the compass, about recidivism. Where's the prejudice coming from? Was it in the data? Or did somebody say, hey, I like keeping African Americans in jail, and I think white people should be out free because that helps me get elected? We can't know if we don't force people to keep track of their data. We need to know what people were thinking when they built their AI. It is not something that grows organically, it's something people build. They make decisions. So we do need to have a lot more archivists in the world. And I'm trying to motivate people to do that. So libraries and librarians are about investing in enhancing people and the populations they serve. Again, a point already made, but I had already handed in the slides. I'm not ripping off that point. Jobs are not only about meeting basic needs, they're also about specialization and redistribution, but I think it's really important they're also about generating social connections. We need to be thinking about how to make the economy connect people together. I think the economy is almost isomorphic with security. So we need to be talking to people and reaching out to them. And notice that this was slightly backhanded. I'm sorry, I went to Chicago on MIT stuff. I'm not anti-Stanford, but we have to talk about who are we serving? Right? Okay. AI, as I mentioned, is a non-magic technology. We author AI, right? And finally, I think we need to be vigilant and to stabilize the defenses for our societies. So that's my conclusions. Even though I'm being normative, I'm just going to be normative. So thanks for your attention.
If you can wait for a moment, Joanna, let's see if we have any questions for Joanna.
A little time. That was a little fast. Sorry about that.
Okay, Thomas, we one over here.
Yeah, just a basic question about basic income. I was wondering, is it also true, like often people argue that the prices will rise, right? When everybody gets a basic income. Did you find something about that as well? Or?
Yeah, I really don't get the whole idea of basic income. That's how I was taught about inflation too.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that I do get that redistribution is fundamentally a problem. but it seems to work better when we raise minimum wages. Although again, there's a ton of studies about that on either sides or whatever. But it seems to be a better way to get wealth injected. I mean, what happened during that 40 years of the great coupling, right? It seems like we gave a lot of money to young white men, all right? And that's not fair, but it may have been enough to start getting money kind of circulating so a lot of other people benefited too. There may not be a trickle down, but there may be some kind of trickle out. So when there's more money in the society, again, I'm just starting to become an economist, so I can't. But I actually worked in Denmark for a while, and the whole country was on strike, and I'm just like, if you give the whole country a raise, then doesn't that just reduce what the kroner is worth, right? I don't understand what's being thought, but I guess it's thought about some relative perspective, and even though the prices will go up, then the relative advantage may change, and so maybe there'll be more equitable distribution. But yeah, no, it's complicated. I would definitely like to do a degree in economics at this point. Maybe I'll be supervising some people. If you guys want to come to solve these problems in Berlin, we are just, our PhDs are online available. You can until January, I think, to apply for next year. More questions?
More questions for Joanna? All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you so much.